Well, one of the things that there is in the end is that you can find beauty in all these evil aspects or these ideas of what is evil or not. So I thought that put that child with his face in a perfect situation would have been like not to accept him like it is, you know.
And also, in a way, the kid, I think the redeeming aspect of that is that the kid has to, in real life, he has to wear a mask. And in the other world, it's like he's freed from that constraint, you know, and he's finally able to be himself. But, I mean, he's a sweet kid. Why would he have to be beautiful? That would be like the Beauty and the Beast thing. It's like, no, you don't have to be beautiful to be nice.
That's one of the things I don't understand from the ending of Beauty and the Beast.
That the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
No. Be afraid. Be very afraid.
There's nothing to fear except God. Whatever that means to you.
Do I look like someone who cares what God thinks?
You're listening to The Fear of God, a podcast exploring the intersection between Christianity and the horror genre. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Fear of God, your favorite podcast that airs on Tuesdays, hosted by people named Nathan and Reed. I am the Reed in that said pairing. Typically with me is one Mr. Nathan Rouse, but he's adopted. And so because he got adopted, he is, he's found a home and he's left. And so he's in the process of moving into some new home. And so I'm very happy for him that he's finally found people who will accept him for who he is. All
1, 2, 3,
burly. Oh my gosh. I don't know what that is, but
3,
oh man. I don't understand. I don't understand what's happening.
1,
this is
2,
bizarre.
3,
Oh my gosh. Oh, that's awesome.
What's hilarious is just how ignorant we both just came off, because you were just like, but Nathan adopted. Like, it was just really funny the way you said it. Like I know you did not intend this whatsoever, but I was like, man, that sounds like real dismissive of people having been adopted. And then, which you weren't at all. You were just trying to make a funny about the orphanage. And then me,
yes.
Anyone who is a native Spanish speaker, definitely, or just a relatively decent Spanish speaker will hear my attempt at the knock on the wall interpretation and be like, all Nathan's doing is going blah blah blah, and I'd be like, yeah, you're right. All I'm doing is blah blah blah, because I really don't know what she says.
So dismissive of other cultures. Yeah, I don't know what they said. They said like uno, dos, tres, blah 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 blah.
Right. That's what it sounded like to me. That's what it sounded like. Wow, we started this one off on a good foot.
We are not intending to be offensive to anybody. People who got adopted.
That's just how it happens.
Spanish-speaking people. We are nothing. No offense intended to anybody. But
you are all welcome at the table.
So sincerely, hi Nathan.
Hey,
how's
man,
it going, buddy?
My paperwork went through, so.
Oh, good.
I'm good. I officially got adopted finally. I got chosen. All those other kids that got left behind are going to die a miserable, terrible death.
Oh my gosh. At 38 years old, you finally got adopted.
Finally.
I knew it was possible.
Yes. Wow. All right.
But no, so as listeners may or may not know, that was a very somewhat tacky and definitely clumsy pun about today's film, which is the 2007 film directed by J.A. Bayona. That is how you say his name, I'm pretty sure.
All right.
Is The Orphanage, which we actually referenced in our very first pilot episode of the show as a film that is very, very beloved by you and beloved by me as well. Hopefully beloved by all who see it.
You want to know something fun, Reed?
What?
We've already I stumbled into this sort of experience with having referenced in episode 1 Emily Rose, and then having my, I don't know, just not, the follow-up experience didn't quite live up to the memory. Guess what? Mm-hmm. The Orphanage does.
Oh, I was going to say, don't tell me that you didn't like this movie.
No, brother. That said, before we get too far down the path, down the adoption process here, what number
These
is
puns
this?
are going to get us in so much trouble.
They are, yeah. We're going to get our first negative review just because someone's like, they don't know anything about the adoption process. How rude.
I know. Please show us grace. So seriously, this is episode 78. Episode 78.
78.
We
had a good time last week with the Shinnin.
The Shinnin. You want to get sued?
So we should introduce this before we get into our typical deviation. So we are. I mean, do you want to introduce the sort of series we're opening up here?
Yeah, I will. I don't have a hashtag for it, but I'm excited.
Well, I mean, I led the way online with it, so you can pick up the baton if you want to, or.
Oh yeah, no, So why don't we go ahead and tell everybody what hashtag Del Toro 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 is all about?
I mean, in case they were unclear.
So we are going to be starting a series. It actually kind of officially starts next week, but this is kind of a preamble, a prelude, a prologue to the series that we're going to be doing, exploring some of the most iconic works of recently Academy Award-winning director Guillermo del Toro. We've toyed with the notion of covering some of his works for a while now, probably since the first year of the show, and now the time has come. We felt it absolutely appropriate given the recent lauds that he's been receiving. We're going to be. Do you want to tell them what we're covering, or want to let that be a surprise?
You mean today or in general? Because I was going to say we pretty spoiled. We pretty much spoiled what we're covering today.
No, that's true. No, I mean the Del Toro series.
Well, I think it's totally fine. We're going to cover Pacific Rim. I'm just kidding.
Pacific Rim, Blade 2, Mimic.
Wow.
And
No, unless things change dramatically, the plan as it currently stands is Devil's Backbone next week, and then Pan's Labyrinth, Hellboy. Now, those, we're not totally sold on the sequence of those two yet, but finishing up with the recently awarded Best Director and Picture Oscar winner, The Shape of Water, which we discussed several weeks ago, at least once or twice over the last few months.
Yeah, see, the film has been sort of trying to sneak its way into the podcast for a little while now, so we might as well just go ahead and just dive
embrace
into The Shape of Water.
Embrace it like Sally Hawkins to the monster. I mean, just
yeah.
So yes, we will be discussing those films in the future, and you referenced The Orphanage being a sort of prologue, if you will, or we could make an easy case that The Orphanage is actually an epilogue to hashtag Parenting Fail. Which began with we need to talk about Kevin, followed through with The Shining, which also served as Quarterly King 3. Everybody gets a title.
Yeah.
Everybody gets multiple titles.
Yeah, get a title, and you get a title, and you get a title.
You know what? Speaking of that, let's move into what you're watching.
Oh!
What you reading.
Ooh.
What are you listening to? Goodness gracious. So we are back.
Getting even more ridiculous.
Yes, it is. Listeners will maybe put together that we go several weeks between recording, even though we release an episode every week. And sometimes, just the first one back, it's a little rocky. It's a little, the on-ramp is cluttered. They're doing some road work on the ramp, and we're just trying to get back on the highway to figure out what we're doing.
Trying to find our bearings and trying to get into our more professional mode, because our mode just as friends is even more absurd than the stuff that you hear on the show.
Sure.
But yes, indeed.
So I made a joking reference that, to what you just said about you get a title. So I did go read. I did see A Wrinkle in Time. I referenced a couple of weeks ago. That was an Oprah reference, by the way. That was my segue to get there.
Yeah, of course.
If you caught that. Okay.
I actually knew when you picked up on my reference, I knew where you were going.
You knew it.
I knew it. I was like, go.
That's why we're friends. Because
iron out that wrinkle. That's right.
you know how much I love Oprah, and here we are.
I know. Man. She gave you all the things.
She did. She did a car, warm fuzzies at that speech at the Golden Globes.
That's true.
A pretty ostentatious get up and A Wrinkle in Time. So, yes, I did see A Wrinkle in Time, as I think we discussed a few weeks back. I have not read the book. Do you want my assessment of Wrinkle in Time?
Yeah, please do. I have not seen it yet. I wanted to go see it. Plans sort of changed for us on the night that we were planning to. I wanted to go see it, but I have read the book, so I know the story.
Sure.
But yeah, go ahead and tell me your assessment of the film.
Yeah.
Spoil anything or not that you want.
Well, I mean, you've read the book, so I honestly have no idea how it compares. It's funny, as I've processed this movie, I think about the wall you and I sometimes hit in our David S. Pumpkins reviewing. This way in which the actual metric doesn't actually honor your sort of total experience. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we run into that all the time.
I think one of the things that's so disheartening about the culture we live in these days, whether it's related to movies or I suppose it would primarily be a pop culture kind of moment that I'm referencing here, is that a thing has to either be good, bad, or perfect. You know what I mean?
Sure,
like
right. Yeah. There
aren't, and honestly, as someone who even minds these things, like Rotten Tomatoes kind of hurts us, right? You look for this very specific kind of metric to determine the qualitativeness of a thing. Where I'm going with this is A Wrinkle in Time has so much positive about it, but one of those things that is not positive about it is the sort of general narrative propulsion, which is is a little bit bad, right? I mean, as far as that's not a great thing when you're dealing with a piece of storytelling. But there's so much sort of good stuff like wrapped up in, the I don't know if I'm making any sense at all. And so it's
you are to me. Yeah.
I think it's a shame. I saw someone, and this is a mutual peer of mine and yours actually, recently give an incredibly dismissive sort of few sentence review of it on the social medias and use the phrase, which I hate, "oh, hot garbage." I'm like, this is so stupid. Don't say things like that. You definitely look less smart than you are. So I guess all of this to say, I think a person who came away from A Wrinkle in Time and really wasn't that big a fan, I would say, no, I get it. I understand. And I'm not even necessarily saying I am a big fan. I am saying I went with my wife and my two eldest daughters, who are 7 and 9. My kids loved it. They were wrapped up in it emotionally. There were some intense moments. I could recognize the weaknesses and still find some really good stuff to enjoy about it. The casting is strong. The visuals are just mesmerizing in places. Having read the book, this won't be much of a surprise to you, but the whole, the trailer positions the story as the search for Chris Pine's father character. Well,
right.
Just that whole journey is real lovely to me. Just the pursuit of this father figure. To the point that I don't know that this is a spoiler for the book, but they reunite. I mean, I presume this happens in the book.
It does. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, that scene is incredibly moving. Like the performers really sell it well, and you can tell it was directed with care. It is a really beautiful moment. The little actor who plays Charles Wallace is great, and really there were moments where I was like, "Dadgum, kid!" Like he is. He is really selling it. So anyway, that's a long-winded way of a sort of endorsement, if that makes any sense.
Sure, yeah.
I would maybe, unless you're a person with kids or have a lot of investment in the story, like if you love the book and maybe are really worried the movie didn't get it right, I might say, you know what, it might be one you wait on. Like in my case, though, I've got daughters. I wanted them to see a young heroine. I wanted to support Ava DuVernay. Like, these were reasons worth going and just sort of, even knowing, like, I knew enough about how it was being received to sort of temper a lot of expectations. Anyway, I'm talking a lot about A Wrinkle in Time. which I saw, and that's my general assessment of it.
Sure. No, I understand. I will say this. I did read the book. One thing that I would encourage you of, like, what you described, if somebody said that they walked away from that experience with the book, that's not too dissimilar. I do.
Oh, really?
I do really love the book, but there's some sort of narrative propulsion. I won't call them problems, but there's some narrative propulsion hiccups because the book is very full of ideas, and so sometimes that gets in the way. But I will say that speaking of ideas, and I'll say this and then I'll move on. Speaking of ideas, though, that one of the things I did find interesting and mildly disheartening, but it just depends. It all just depends on the context. Madeleine L'Engle was a very outspoken Christian.
Right.
It is my understanding that because the book has very specific, like, scripture verses get quoted. It doesn't have an altar call at the end of the book, but there's a very obvious and overt sort of Christian language kind of theme that laces into the book that, from my understanding, was largely excised from the film. Not that I have really any issue or problem with that. I always just have to see the film and see if the film works on its own merits. This is the adaptation that they made. But yeah, I would encourage readers who had any mild interest in the film but have not yet read the book, like yourself, to seek out the book, read it. I do adore the book.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, and you I think I actually did not intend to spend 10 minutes talking about this, but you assessed it well unintentionally by saying, it is a movie of ideas more than story.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Having not known what the text does, once you sort of realize this is literally just kind of characters going from one place to the next, not like journeying, if that makes sense. Like,
yeah, of course.
It's literally like you have conversations in this place. Well, now then you go to this place and you have more conversations. Right. You know what I mean? Like, so that actually did hearten me a little bit, because it's like, well, if that's sort of the flow of the actual text, then maybe that's not that big a deviation. That said, I do think they maybe politically corrected some of the ideas a little more, but you know, and as someone who had an investment in the book before seeing it like you, it's possible you would feel that loss as someone who could look at what they do say and the words they do use and the language they do employ and be able to apply a sort of faith kind of context and construct. It didn't bother me that much. Anyway, so
I can understand that. I'm expecting, when I finally see the film, and I will, I don't know if I'll get to see it in the theater, but I hope I can. But I'm expecting a similar experience to the Narnia film adaptations, where the films have merit, and the stories themselves have merit, but there's some sort of deliberate excising of some more overtly Christian material that I do think, maybe because of my prior knowledge to it, I think sort of hinders its impact. But, you know, to each their own. Other people who don't have a connection to the source material or don't have a connection to that specific Christian language may walk away feeling moved and feeling like they really enjoyed it. I don't know. But I will segue rather briefly, and I won't say too much, but speaking about a film about ideas, I saw Annihilation.
Oh, man, I want to see that.
Annihilation is mesmerizing. It is mesmerizing. I will warn listeners that the first, say, hour or so is very deliberately paced. If you saw Ex Machina, that will be no surprise to you, because that film has a sort of similar pacing to it. That is not to say that it is by any means boring. I was never bored in the film, but that first hour, you kind of feel the very intentional pace. The director doesn't try to infuse any sort of like, oh, isn't this shocking or anything. There's one moment near the first 10 minutes or so that sort of feels like a ramp up, but then it goes into like 45 minutes of just searching and exploration. But I will say there are some moments that made me cringe, made my skin crawl, and there is a sequence. If listeners have seen it, this is not going to be a spoiler for anybody who has not seen it.
Don't reference where it falls in the film, because I don't want to go in.
I'm not going to.
Okay,
I'm not going to. No, and I'm not going to give any specifics. Listeners who happen to have seen the film, I am talking about the bear scene. That sequence when you finally see the film, is one of the most terrifying, horrifying, nightmarish, gut-wrenchingly tense things I have seen in a film in recent years. It was that specific sequence. Again, when you see the film, I'm talking about the bear sequence. You will know what I'm referring to when you finally see the film. That sequence was nightmarish on a level that I kind of wasn't prepared for. But it is a very compelling and I think very interesting film. It is also a film that is almost frustratingly about ideas.
Yeah.
Like I would not fault somebody walking out of that film and being like, what? So what were they trying to say? Because I felt like, well, that's kind of what I think the director wants you to parse out for yourself. I think that's part of what he wants you to sort of play around with and see.
Well, and I mean,
what
again,
does this all add up to?
as you mentioned, like if you've seen Ex Machina, well, if you haven't, watch Ex Machina. Goodness gracious, I love that movie.
Yes.
I have just not been able to steal away the time to go to Annihilation yet, but I had this like one of the greatest pendulum swings of emotion recently where I was scanning Twitter and I follow the movie critic Matt Solar-Zeitz. I don't know if you know who that is, but I actually think I could be totally wrong, but I think he inherited Ebert's website. But someone mentioned to him, they said, hey, are you going, because he loves Annihilation, someone tweeted to him, are you going to broadcast to folks that Annihilation is available on Netflix? And I was like, what? And so, of course, I immediately go to Netflix and look, and I can't find it.
No.
Well, no, it is just not in the States. It is.
I see.
Like in Canada and outside the U.S., it is right now available to stream on Netflix.
Wow.
And I was like, oh, God. You know, so you have that like 5-second blip of, sweet, I'm going to watch that tonight at home.
I know. Just move to Canada. Just move to Canada and then watch it.
I do think about that a lot these days, but I don't know, you know, I don't need to move back probably. Not for a little while.
Oh, no kidding.
Anyway, so do you have more?
Nope, that's it. Like, you've heard my qualifiers. Go see Annihilation if any of that sounds interesting to you.
Well, that,
all right,
ladies and gentlemen, has been another episode of
What You Watching?
Boom, 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 boom.
What You Reading? What You Listening to?
Oh, axe to the chest.
Oh man.
All right, Reed.
Yeah, so
now,
so
30 minutes later.
Yeah,
we are going to. I think we just did our What You're Watching so long because we wanted people to forget just how poorly we engaged the concept of adoption at the top of the episode.
Yes. Much of which may get excised, but we'll see.
Oh, no, it's fine. We show grace to everyone, even ignorant folk like us.
Please.
So. Yes, as the prologue to hashtag Del Toro Toro Toro, or the epilogue to hashtag Parenting Fail, we are today discussing The Orphanage.
Yes.
Reed.
Nathan.
I don't know. I've thought about this all day.
Oh boy.
Like, I'm just going to warn you, there may be all fives of David S. Pumpkins. I'm just telling you right now.
Oh, okay. All right.
It might go there. And the way our conversations usually, hey, I'm here, you know, like I want to get adopted. I got to get out of here, man. You know, the way our conversations usually go, where you tend to have an upswing in your rating system.
There's nowhere to go for you.
Right.
You're already sitting on the roof. You're already like, oh man.
There is a little. We'll see when we get there. I might not have a 5 on one of my categories, but we'll see when we get there. So yes, we are talking about The Orphanage today. Reed, I love this movie.
Oh, this is a wonderful movie.
For the first time on video, whenever it first hit video, this was before our oldest child was born. So this is 10 years ago now.
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
That's back when my wife watched scary stuff with me. And she doesn't anymore. Now, how many, did you see it in the theater?
Not in the theater. No, I saw it like almost the week or two after it was released to home video, but yeah, I missed it in the theater. I think because at the time, I wasn't finding it anywhere near me locally, which is odd because I did live in LA at the time, so I'm sure it was playing somewhere, but I couldn't find it anywhere.
Can I tell a funny story real quick?
Please do.
inspired by the movie, not necessarily related to it. But this happens more than once in the film. But the first time is very towards the beginning when Laura wakes up to the sounds of Simone somewhere, and Carlos, half asleep, says, "I'll go. It's my turn."
Yeah.
You know, and then he dozes back off. So that made me laugh because our first child, who is now 9 years old, so if you have kids, especially if you're a mother and you have kids listening to this, don't judge me too harshly, but you know how crazy those first days are. So our very first kid, the very first week, the very first few days she was home, my wife, who generally is not like a huge morning person, you know, like she's a don't talk to me until I've had my coffee type of person. One of those first mornings was particularly noticeably more that than normal, more like angsty at me. And like it was,
Sure.
Hey, you're a man, you're married, you've been for a while.
I know, yeah.
You know that feeling when you can tell it's directed at you? Like they're not just like
Yes.
irked.
Yes.
Like it's like radiating at you, you know?
Something, yes. They look at you with a tone.
And they don't even have to look at you, but yes.
Yes.
You can feel it, like the spidey sense is tingling. Well,
I did something. I don't know what I did yet, but I did something.
That's exactly it. So Carlos made me laugh because one of these very first mornings, my wife on a particular AM is like just radiating. So the husband sense is going off, and I'm like, what's up? You know, this is brand new baby at home. Like, hey, you feel at me. And she was like, she said, in the middle of the night, the baby started crying, and I asked you if you would go take care of her, and you sat up and you said maybe, and then you laid back down and went to sleep. And I was like, oh, you can't get mad. I don't remember that.
I don't know that.
Mad at me for that. Anyway,
I know.
So that made
no,
me...
my wife and I have that experience. Not that specific experience because our son's 6 now, but we have that experience sometimes where, like, sometimes he will try to climb into our bed, and when he tries to climb into our bed, like he's just like jazzercising all over our bed and kicking us in the back and headbutting us and doing all this other stuff. He's a very restless sleeper. But he'll try to sneak into our bed, and some nights I am so deep in sleep I don't recognize it until like the morning, and sure enough we'll wake up and she'll be like, I asked you like 3 times, like, why aren't you taking him back to his bed? And I'm like, I remember none of that. Like I remember waking up and him just being there, but I don't remember any of the interactions. Yeah, it's kind of funny. I have no idea how to pivot back into the orphanage.
That's all right. That's all right.
But we'll just go ahead and just dive right back into it. This filmmaker, I don't know if I would need to look back on IMDb, but of the 3 films that he has made, I love and adore all 3.
What else is there? I don't know that I know of the other ones.
So he also directed The Impossible with you.
Whoa!
Yes.
That makes a lot of sense. I love The Impossible. I wept like a baby. Speaking of babies, I wept like a baby in that movie.
Yeah.
With Obi-Wan and Spider-Man.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So he directed The Impossible. He also directed.
That's very cool to know.
Some consider it last year. I consider it 2 years ago. A Monster Calls. So yeah, both of those films.
Did you notice the stark lack of reaction right to that?
Well, yeah. Your cheers of jubilation. Your cheers of jubilation at The Impossible, like I just announced that you were going to win the lottery or something, and then the crickets that followed the Monster Calls. I'm just like, and he directed a Monster Calls, and I just hear chirp, 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 like nothing on your end.
I did see.
I loved a Monster Calls. I loved it.
For some reason, I might have to give it another chance, but it did not connect with me. I had not read the book, so I didn't know it, but that is interesting to know. So yes, cool. I have seen all 3 of the movies that he's made, unless there are others.
Yeah, I don't know of any others. Those are the 3 main ones that I know of. There may have been others. I would just need to look up IMDb to know for certain. But yeah, The Orphanage, is a powerful film. It is a deeply affecting film, and it's, to be honest with you, when we get to, which we hopefully will soon, I'm struggling a little bit to kind of understand all of my feelings around it. to the degree that, like, some things I know very clearly, yes, this is how I feel about it, this is what I think about it. And then there are some elements that I'm like, man, I do not know. I honestly, my affection for the film is unqualified. I absolutely love the film, but there's some elements in the film that I don't know. I'm kind of of two minds, a bit torn about it. But let's dive right in specifically. Tell me a little bit about your first encounter with it. You asked me if I had seen it. I saw it on home video. You watched it like right after it came out. Was this the only, like, the second time you've seen it, or have you watched it multiple times?
I'm pretty sure there was another. I'm pretty sure this was my third viewing. I can't quite recall the context of the second one. The first one was my wife and I and another couple on a beach trip, actually with my sister too. So 5 of us on a beach trip 10 years ago. And I really adored it then. And, again, I don't remember what the second context was, but like this, it's funny. When I rewatched it for our conversation, this is random peek behind the curtain of my life. Most evenings I try to get to bed at a very specific time. And so my clock was running out on my night, and I knew the runtime of the movie, and I was like, okay, fine, I will just skim some of it, because I'd seen it twice, like I know I enjoy it. I remember general beats. Let me just get back in. And Reed, I got totally sucked back into it. Like, I tried in places to be like, okay, I wonder if I can skip. No, it's just so captivating, and it's so moody and atmospheric, and there's what's going to happen, and what happened to Simone? And even though I know already. I was very pulled back in. It is, you used a word a minute ago that I would apply here as well. It's very affecting.
It is.
Something I wrote down that I think, I will, if I may, will briefly summarize the movie. Can I do that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Is that okay to do that?
Because I don't know how many of our listeners have seen this film. Yeah.
Well, one, yes. If you've not seen it, there aren't many I would do this, because Reed and I typically have rather robust and fun conversations. I'd say listen to us talk regardless of whether you've seen the material or not. This is a very good movie. I would definitely encourage anyone to watch it. There are very easy spoilers to acquire if you are unfamiliar with the movie, and I would say if you're curious about the movie, go watch it and then come back and listen to the conversation.
Yes.
Now that you've done that, so the story of the movie is it opens with a flashback, a group of children, many of whom appear handicapped of some variety, playing in the yard of this big house, a mansion-esque kind of house, and one of them is getting adopted. Well, then you flash forward to the present, and our main character, Laura, is that adopted child grown up. She and her husband, with their now adopted son, Simon, to the sort of the anglicized version, are moving. They're moving back into this big house. All of the people who originally populated this orphanage are gone. She has, and it's really a lovely sort of intention. I mean, it's a very benevolent act, to come back to this space. They intend to adopt multiple children, to sort of, they never get so far as to stating this, but the idea is ultimately to sort of reopen it as a type of orphanage for them.
Right.
Well, Simone, you learn, is HIV positive. He doesn't know that, and he also doesn't know he's adopted at the outset of the film. A sequence of events happens early in the movie where he goes missing. And sort of threading the backstory is what happened to the rest of these children after Laura was adopted from the orphanage. It becomes this kind of centerpiece mystery in a really positive way. And so you're sort of, as a viewer, you get wrapped up in the mystery of what happened to these kids. These little clues get doled out, as any good sort of mystery story does. But genre-wise or subgenre-wise, it's a ghost story, and there's some incredibly effective sort of visuals, some great direction. The actress who plays Laura is very captivating to watch. She and her husband have a really lovely relationship, kind of until they don't. She starts getting more and more desperate to find her son, because in the timeline of the movie, 9 months pass before any sort of concrete evidence of his, of what happened to him presents itself. the movie sort of finalizes with you get some real direct context and resolution to the what happened to the kids 30 years ago storyline, and you learn huge spoiler alert, you learn very directly what happened to the son. And what's really amazing about this movie, and we can talk about this some, one of the things rather that's really amazing about this movie is the incident with the son and what happened to him is not directly. I'll state this, and then we can qualify it if we need to. It's two separate stories. You know,
absolutely.
The disappearance of Simone, you think, because of the nature of the movie and what you're presented in our sort of conditioned way of watching and consuming stories, is going to be and is quite entwined with the story of these children from 30 years ago. It's not at all, and that's one of the big sort of rug pulls. Well, what you learn is inadvertently, and this is where Reed alluded a minute ago to mixed feelings, and I can totally understand that. Laura, you learn, and she learns, is directly responsible for not just the disappearance of the son, but the death of the son. What happens? You flash back, and you, in good Shyamalan Sixth Sense fashion, it fills in the gaps. What you discover. So the last time she sees Simone, they are at odds with each other. They're fighting. He has learned of his non-parentage, as it were, to them, and that he is sick. He's very mad at them. He attacks her not like in a hyper violent fashion, but in a pretty kind of, scary fashion. And he runs off. Well, she goes looking for him, doesn't realize it's a bit complicated to explain, but the simplest version is she's inadvertently locked him in a particular room that is a basement that she's unaware of. He gets stuck in the basement. And this is why this movie is so dadgum good. Like all the trappings of a good ghost story are there. What you don't realize is they're not ghosts. It's really him desperate to be free, and she thinks it's some sort of haunting. And my goodness. Right. So anyway, she inadvertently traps him. He gets stuck and falls, which theoretically, the fall itself might not have killed him, but I suppose it actually did. But nonetheless, he's in the basement of this house she's living in for 9 months, and she has no idea where he's at. She has no idea that he's there. You, the viewer, think he has been absconded with or has been taken by the ghost or something. It is literally he's right under her. And she has no idea. So the movie. Go ahead. Well, let me the final thought that gives Reed mixed feelings, and should give anyone mixed feelings, but he's stated that, and so I'm referencing that. Is she is so stricken with grief when she finally discovers him and realizes that it was her actions that killed him, that she kills herself. The act of doing so has this really kind of lovely sort of poetic gothic fairy tale kind of sensibility to it, but nonetheless she does kill herself. So anyway, that is less brief than it probably should have been, the synopsis of the movie. We can now sort of pick it apart. I'll lead with one thought, and then I want you to unpack. I texted you last night that I can't personally, and I would love you to feedback some thoughts here if you know one off the top of your head, or if you've thought about it since then. The concept of the red herring, a story giving you a piece of information or withholding a piece of information that causes you to believe a certain other aspect is really going on. Like this movie is so stinking good at that. Like you have no idea as a viewer, because it entertains these traditional conventions of genre storytelling, such as, she goes to they go to the grief counselor session. You know what I mean? So they do this thing because he's missing. They go to the grief counselor. Is it a natural phenomenon? Well, that doesn't work for them. They go to the medium. So the medium shows up, and in sort of good seance movie fashion, there's a whole sequence of that. So like they present it's a shell game. They present all of the pieces of the puzzle that are part and parcel of this subgenre, while having shown you just didn't realize you were shown what happened. And when it finally reveals, it's so staggering. Anyway, I'm talking a lot. You talk.
Well, no, I mean, like you mentioned this thing, red herring. I mean, I think that's the most appropriate terminology for it. But what's fascinating about it is that we don't need to go on a long diatribe about this. I'll just sort of briefly mention my definition. I think you'll agree with it. I think there is a difference in film between, say, a twist and a reveal. A twist to me is something where, like, the film has been actively deceiving you. The film has been purposefully making you think one thing is true when it really was not true. A reveal to me is something where the film is not actually deceiving you. It just hasn't given you all the pieces of information yet.
Sure.
So when it does give you the pieces of information, yes, that will recontextualize things that you have previously seen, but it's not necessarily like that the film has been sort of actively been deceiving you. One of the things about this film, you did depthfully summarize the sort of the major beats. It leads you to believe that there are ghosts. It also leads you to believe that that the ghosts are directly responsible for Simone's disappearance. But what I think is very, very genius about the film is that the ghosts aren't a lie. They aren't a deception. There are ghosts. They just aren't responsible for Simone's disappearance. And that is what is that pivot, that narrative pivot, I found to be so brilliant.
Sure.
That it's like yes, it's not that the ghosts were imaginary, although much of what we attributed to the ghosts
is our assumptions.
Is our assumptions, exactly.
Wouldn't you? Would I
recognize?
I will even throw another layer onto the beauty that is this movie, despite how insanely tragic it is again playing with these conventions. Your assumption. And once it sort of starts dabbling and revealing the sort of ghost phenomena, and maybe you'll challenge this and you feel free to nuance it, your assumption as a viewer, based on your experience of movies like this, is they are malevolent. And really, they aren't. I mean, they're a bit tricksters a little bit, but more from the standpoint of once you realize these are children and acting the way children do, and they have their own sort of kind of systems that these children who know each other operate in, and the games they play and that sort of thing. But the point I'm simply trying to make is we would naturally assume these ghosts are then malevolent because we don't realize that they aren't involved with Simone's disappearance. And it's just, man, it just plays with those things so beautifully.
Oh, absolutely. Well, because the first time that you see in the film what you and this listeners is why we encouraged you to watch it before coming to listen to it, because some of these intricacies are important and may seem a bit confusing and seem a bit contradictory unless you see the film. The first time that you see what you think is a ghost, it behaves malevolently. It shoves her back. It knocks her into the bathtub. It breaks her finger, or at least causes it to bleed and everything. And so that's what you presume is the ghost. So naturally, you would presume the ghosts are malevolent. You don't find out until that big reveal that was actually Simone in
costume,
like in a costume, and that sort of prompted all of these paranormal feelings or thinking that this thing happened. And so, the film as a piece of narrative storytelling is nearly flawless. I know that's a bold statement, but in terms of structurally, all the mechanics working together, the artfulness of the pieces, the individual pieces coming together to make an overly satisfying whole, it all works very, very well. Just as a film, it is exceptionally well crafted because of some of the ways that it subverts these beats that we're talking about. You referenced earlier, and appropriately so, the reason I am so conflicted about this film, and we can unpack this, the reason I'm so conflicted about this film, there is no question whatsoever about how tragic it all is. And danged if I'm not tempted to call the ending a happy ending.
Right.
I mean, the listeners, you'd have to see, if you have seen the film, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't seen the film, the moment where she decides to take her life. She decides to take her life, but I think the film almost would lead you to a path where it says that she's kind of out of her head at that moment because she's discovered him. It's all come clear to her in that moment. Like she finds him, but we didn't even talk about this. Like she's had encounters with the ghost. She's been chasing these ghosts.
Yeah.
And she's been chasing she thinks that she's chasing these ghosts to solve the mystery of her son's disappearance. She is, but little did she know it's not like, she makes a bargain with them. Hey, I'll play this game with you and then you'll lead me to my son. So that happens, and at first she thinks she's got him back. At first she thinks like, oh, they've given me my son back. And then she realizes at that moment where she takes the sort of the mask off of his head and her breakdown when it all comes flooding in, what has happened, it is utterly and absolutely devastating. And so then you could make a case that she's kind of out of rational thought when she takes all these pills. She's got his medicine that he was taking because he was sick, and she's got that medication. She begins to take a whole bunch of the pills. And when I was watching the film, I was kind of specifically being attuned to the fact that, like, it doesn't feel like a deliberate, hey, I'm disgusted with myself or whatever. Like, she's trying to get, this is so devastating when I say this, she's trying to get his corpse to take them. Like she's
initially,
she's putting them in his mouth.
Yeah.
She's putting them in his mouth, and it almost could be a reading of the film that then, like, to kind of encourage him or show him how, she starts putting them in her own mouth. And,
wow.
And then, like, so there's all that going on. That in other words, I think a case could be made that it was not so much an intentional suicide as sort of an accidental sort of, I've lost my mind, don't know what I'm doing,
right,
and sort of an accidental overdose, as it were. But here's where the film really messes with me, Nathan, like really messes with me, is danged if not from that moment on, if I'm not like poignantly moved and deeply affected by, because then when that happens, Simone in her arms turns from, man, we're saying these things so cavalierly, but turns from a corpse into her son again.
Right.
And it's because she has now died.
Right.
She is now a ghost, so she's seeing him on that same sort of play. But he turns into her son again, and he says, good Lord, I'm getting emotional even saying about this. He says, I had one wish, that you would stay and you would take care of the children. And so then she looks up, and when she looks up, she sees all the orphans.
Right.
She sees all of the ghosts there, and then like the music and the sound of the children's laughter as they like come around her. Yeah. There's nothing horrific about it.
Right.
It's all treated very tenderly, and it's just, that's why I get so kind of torn about the film, is that I'm going to make this statement, and listeners, maybe this whole episode we just need to be shown a lot of grace, because I can nuance some of my feelings here, but it's like, if someone were to sort of get very upset and begin to point a finger and saying this film is justifying suicide, I would be like, on one hand, I would say that's a vast oversimplification of what's happening. But on the other hand, I can't balk against them too much because of how almost redemptive her death feels to the rest of the ghosts.
Right.
And even more so than that. That's not the note the film ends on, although it easily could have. The note the film even further chooses to end on is a memorial to her and to the other lost children. All of their names are there that she was there with in the orphanage when she was an orphan. And so it's a memorial to her and to the rest of them. And her husband comes back to this place, and he's just wandering through the rooms. He finds this locket, and when he looks up after finding this locket, these doors sort of, spectrally open up as if a ghost or a presence has just entered into the room. And then he looks up, and this bittersweet, almost joy just floods over him, and he smiles, and that's the note that the film chooses to end on. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like there's so many touch points that you could point at. Yeah, so I mean, honestly, I feel very, very sort of torn, trying to balance the reality of what I know is happening with the emotional response I have to the film. If that makes sense to people.
Sure.
It's like basing the tangible reality of what I know has just taken place with the emotional sensibility that the film actively gives me, I get torn about it. But yeah, I've been talking a while.
A couple of thoughts. You've sort of spectrally and corporeally opened the door here to this sort of suicide conversation, and that's not even really tangential to the movie. It's how the movie ends, so it's worth spending some moments talking about that directly. There are three thoughts. I'm going to summarize them as premeditation, the Great Divorce, and Spanish. Okay, so I do think one thing, so premeditation. So, did you ever see the movie? I'm pretty sure the title of it is The Sea Inside with Javier Bardem.
I have not seen it, but I know of it, and I know its basic premise.
Yeah, it's sort of a right to life kind of conversation.
Right.
I really, really, really disliked that movie. Just because, as a person of faith, I really the whole subject of the movie. It's been a while since I've watched it, but I think he has some sort of either disease or he is crippled in some way that has severely impaired his standard of living. And I really wrestled when I watched it at the time of seeing it, because as a person of faith, I just really kicked against this notion that there cannot be found reasons to live. The movie is entirely a meditation on this guy wanting to die and looking for permission, basically, from his caregivers. That's an incredibly abbreviated version of that movie. So one thing in terms of the suicide conversation with the orphanage is, as you sort of alluded, there's nothing premeditated about what she does. Spontaneous is a bit too strong a word. It's not like she's like, oh, there's pills, let me do this. It isn't even that intentional. I love your sort of interpretation of that it's almost you could argue that the whole movie is about sort of a parental type of nurturing, protective kind of idea, and or at least how I understood what your interpretation was there, that her taking those pills was almost just, as we do with kids sometimes, here, look, this is how you do it, and
yes,
you do it too.
Yes.
So that's really lovely, even as tragic as it is. So that's the premeditation thought. I'll save the Great Divorce for last. So it's Spanish. I wonder if, and I'm just positing this as an idea, I wonder if you and I, as highly white dudes, may be missing a puzzle piece culturally in the conversation. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know enough.
Sure.
It honestly, when you were talking, what popped into my head was Coco, the Pixar movie.
Oh.
And how and not in a bad way, as in like,
right. No,
are we just sort of culturally missing a puzzle piece? Would any culture esteem suicide? That's not what I'm saying. I am saying, are we just sort of culturally not in the conversation that makes it such that the things that happen in those last 5 minutes are emotionally significant culturally in a way they don't, that we pick up on as observers and people who value story and sort of resonance and all that sort of thing. But I wonder if we're just missing a piece of the cultural puzzle to really grasp.
Sure. No, I think that's valid. I think that's totally
afterlife valid. Reunion type of thing and conversation the movie's trying to have.
I agree.
Pivoting from the Latin culture to right back into the Caucasians of the world, the Anglos of the world with C.S. Lewis, I thought during this rewatch, I thought a lot about the Great Divorce. And I do think if there's any cautionary aspect to this movie, it's once she starts conveying such a desperation for reunion with him, with Simone. Even do you remember the conversation that's, oh my gosh, this is a freaky moment, where she thinks she's talking to Carlos in the bed?
Oh my gosh, yes. And
it's very much like, I don't remember the text explicitly, but it's effectively like, we have to be back together. This is how we're meant to be. We're to get together. It's like she keeps that word, she probably says half a dozen times in 5 sentences.
Sure. Right.
And I just kept thinking about the sort of element of Great Divorce, about our inability to have kind of full wholeness because of some of the attachments we have, if that makes sense at all.
Right. Yeah.
That seems to compete with what I was trying to say a minute ago about cultural sort of whatever, but that's something that made me think of, was just she kind of seals her fate.
Yes.
With her obsession with Simone, like,
yeah,
these sort of lot, for better or worse, Carlos is kind of reasonable and one might say right. You know what I mean? Like,
sure.
It's been 9 months. There are no clues. You know, police work, detective work, data would suggest they are not going to find this boy. You know,
yeah,
and,
exactly.
and yet she pleads for those 2 days alone, and that's kind of it.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
Anyway,
and that's all there is to it.
Yeah. Anyway, so those were just in terms of the pure kind of taking her life aspect to it. Just some thoughts that were coming to me while you were sort of thinking through that. But go ahead.
Yeah, and I'm gonna rabbit trail for maybe 2 minutes here, just because I want to be real explicit about this. Like, it was interesting watching this movie in the particular season that I'm in, and this season, please God, let it be a season that there be. Oddly, it's been going on now for, I want to say, maybe 6 to 9 months, where I have more than a couple, like probably 4 or 5 friends at various degrees of closeness to me, who have actively talked about it, thought about it, at least one attempted it, and it's one of those things where I get really torn when this conversation comes up, because it's something that I really desperately want. Whenever I hear that somebody that I love, that I care about, is struggling with that degree of despair and that degree of hurt and pain and hopelessness to what's ahead of them, you know, I want so desperately to just yank them out of it. I want so desperately to just pull them free from that. But the English language is patently insufficient to be able to do that, let alone most of the time these things are either over phone or over Facebook or over something else. It's like it's very difficult to do that in any sort of strong capacity. It is somewhat interesting. I heard a statistical study that was done. I think it might have been like by Freakonomics or something, that they did some tests and they analyzed some data, and they basically said that one of the most effective deterrents, this is going to sound so strange, but one of the most effective deterrents to suicidal thoughts or suicidal tendencies was to call them stupid, which sounds very cold.
To call the tendencies stupid, not the person. Is that what you're saying?
Not the person.
Right.
Yeah, never.
I was like, wow.
No,
that
but
does
that's
sound
the thing. Is like it feels heartless. But they were basically saying what you do when you, like, normally our inclination would be to say, no, you have so much to live for. There's so much beyond this, all of that, and that's what they've convinced themselves is not possible. So what you do, at least this is what the study said, and maybe there's a more recent study that invalidates some of this because this was several years ago, but they said what you do when you call the notion of taking your life stupid is you attack the rationality in their own mind of what they've concluded.
Right.
So it's not as much as that would feel like a cold response to somebody who's desperately hurting, that if you're just viewing the data as raw data, that to call that decision dumb or irrational actually sort of resets the tumblers to be like, oh, that's not the response I was expecting to hear about that. Now, I don't know that that's true or valid or effective. I have yet, with my friends that I've mentioned, had the guts to take that tactic.
Right.
But it is one of those things where when we think about this and relating it back specifically to the orphanage, that's why I kind of honed in on, I actively feel like in that moment she's not in her right mind.
Sure.
Because she is, and understandably so, after spending 9 months desperately searching for her son, she not only finds out that her son is dead, but that she is responsible for his death. I mean, that, like, anybody would lose their mind. Anybody would lose themselves in coming to grips with that revelation. And so that's why it's like, it's not quite the same thing as like, although I think it's a totally appropriate comparison and reference, it's not the same thing as like a See Inside or the Rights of Life kind of thing, because it's very much just sort of you've lost yourself. And you know what? I'll pivot that around. She's lost herself. Right. In this moment. She's lost herself in her search for her son. She's lost herself. Because another thing that really stood out to me a lot is the allusions in this film, ALLUSIONS, not illusions of deception, to Peter Pan. Right. The language to Peter Pan, like Lost Boys and the, Never Neverland and Never Growing Up and all these kinds of things, and all of these sort of referential touch points to Peter Pan and to her being like the Wendy, and eventually, true enough, in the film, I think she's either reading from Peter Pan or words from previous conversations are coming back, and she's becoming like the mother to the Lost Boys, very much like the Wendy character in Peter Pan. And one of the things that I was thinking of is really the film is about like lostness, not lostness as in like, you need Jesus, but lostness as in like, I've lost something. I've lost myself. I've lost my son. I've lost my grip. These children are lost. All of these things, like this lostness to it. And I think that is why, despite, so listeners out there who may have felt like, we're sort of brushing past the intentional death at your own hand or the accidental death at your own hand or whatever, to me, one of the reasons that I find the ending of the film so beautiful is because they have found each other. There is a foundness to the conclusion of the film. Even in when her husband comes back to there's a foundness. There's not a lostness there anymore. There's a foundness, and that I do want to dig in on, because one of the things that I find so compelling about the film in general is how there is a way that you could look at it. There's a way that you could read it. There's a way that you could sort of experience the film. And as we did in texting after it, call it tragic and say, this is just heartbreaking and devastating and utterly tragic. But there is a note of the film that I cannot dismiss of finding the lost at the end. Now, granted, it's through this context of death, and yes, listeners, we're exploring, we're not explaining. but there is something in the film that really resonated with me about just that the lost will be found. Right. That what has been lost will be found again. And listeners, if you've seen the film and had a very different take on it, and you would say like, hey, no, they're dead. That's tragic. Don't stop trying to brush over this or baptize this. I would question how actively engaged with the film. But in sincerity, like that's what I find so, I'll go ahead and say, lovely and beautiful about when she looks around and sees the orphans there. The look on their faces. Oh, man. Well, I don't remember the child's name, but the blind girl who comes over and starts touching her face. It's wrenching. My gosh. Well, it's interesting. Can I throw at you, like, now, sure. Hear me. There's part of me that really wants to buy in on this. There's part of me that feels like it might be a generous read, but I'm okay with it. You're a generous read. I'm a generous read. There's a part of me that's kind of okay with that, because you're reminding us of the end of the film where Carlos shows back up and there is a piece about him. I do think it's hard to reconcile some of that with the way their relationship finishes. You know what I mean? Like, it is very much a sad thing. But I'll draw a real direct line to where you were walking, at least. Like, she enters the land of the dead to restore these children. Yes, that is exactly what happens. And to solve, it's arguable that the text of the film presents the deaths of these children. Well, no, it's not arguable. It's definite that the text presents the deaths of these children were tragic and are, a quote unquote case to be solved. Like, in other words, like there was a mystery, there was murder, there was foul play against these disabled, helpless children, and that her sort of in entering into the suffering of those kids and by her own death kind of restores their wholeness in the afterlife, if you will. So that is a very redemptive read, and I kind of, you're a redemptive read. I really kind of like that, to sort of
maybe sidestep a little bit back to where you were speaking in terms of her being out of her own mind by the end of it. Like, that is an easy case to build too, because one thing we haven't directly explicitly stated is when she, man, I have so many thoughts. I love this movie. Two things. One, in terms of the lostness, you built the shadow. I'm going to make the lines a little clearer here. It's potentially arguable that the minute she puts on that headmistress outfit, that's it.
Yes,
she's gone. Like
she's gone.
She has kind of entered in to a whole new plane of existence, if you will. That's
Absolutely.
a sort of metaphorical read. You're a metaphor. You're a literal read.
You can't do it every single time.
I can, and I might. But a literal scan would be that, and this is the more kind of heartbreaking sort of psychological side. So Carlos leaves. She asks for these 2 days by herself in the house. She engages the children's ghosts. And one of the most powerfully scary, because the text of the movie means it's not scary if you understand what's really happening. Scary scenes in almost any movie is the knock on the wall game she plays with those ghosts.
Yes.
Yes. And this is part of the insane beauty of this movie, is like our comprehension of the ghost genre means we are terrified. And that is an incredibly well composed and directed scene, shadow and light working against the characters and the viewers. It's all one take, but holy crap, it's scary. And yet it isn't, because they aren't malicious entities. Anyway, so she plays this game with them, this kind of variant hide and seek type of scenario, and goes after one of them. The going after of one of them is what reveals to her this door that she inadvertently slammed shut. She opens it. She finds Simone at the bottom. And in terms of lostness, to sort of validate where you were going, I think in terms of an almost out of mind type of thing, I invited my wife, because she'd seen the movie before with me 10 years ago. And in those last 15 minutes, I said, hey, she was still up. I was like, why don't you come finish this movie with me? So she comes into the room. And what actually happens, what actually happens, listener, if you don't watch the movie, but do go watch it. It's great. So she goes down the stairs. She sees a quote unquote live Simone. He starts talking to her, and there's this really deliberate sort of lighting change. So you kind of, if you're picking up on it, it's a whole different sort of reality, if you will.
Right.
So he's talking to her. Oh, you found me, or now we're together, or whatever, dialogue happens there. Well, she starts, you hear the children upstairs banging on the wall, sort of this cacophony, this chaotic sort of thing going on.
Right.
The camera's spinning all around her. She's holding him against her. And, then the blanket she's holding sort of unravels in her arms, and then she finds the body. And so, to your point, I think it's an easy case to make. Oh, what I was going to say is my wife came to join me, and she's watching it. And while Laura is holding fake Simone, I don't remember what my wife said, but the basic inquiry was sort of like, I don't remember what's going on here or something. And I was like, she killed him.
Right.
It was an accident, but she killed him. And my wife, she goes, she killed him? I said, yeah. And she just goes, Nathan. It's like, why did you invite me in here? This is terrible. Anyway, but validating your,
I do not want to see this
right,
movie.
Right. Validating your point of 20 minutes ago at this point of, this sense in which whether we enter the redemptive spiritual spoke of the conversation by the end of the movie, or the psychological, like, she's gone. Like, she is not a part, like, because of that moment. Once she discovers the actual body on the floor and realizes she was just fantasizing this sort of thing. As a random sort of technical note, one of the things I find so insanely tragic about this movie is the absolutely and utterly benign and incidental way that she was responsible for his death. In other words, so many of the sort of parenting fails that we see in movies, you know, whether it's Jack Torrance and his alcoholism directly impacting his family, or, you know, Tilda Swinton's detachedness towards Kevin having an impact. Like, they have a loving relationship. Now,
Right.
they kind of become at odds with each other just because of new information, but that's more like developmental sort of just stuff. Like, that would happen in any sort of relationship. So, like, there's literally nothing wrong with her. Is this, you understand what I'm saying? Like,
oh, yes.
Like, she's just the person who does the absolute wrong thing for the absolute unintentional reason and has no clue she's done it. You know?
Well, and it's so, like, to your point, and I apologize if you were about to point this out even further, that like, the action by which she sort of dooms him, if I can use that word, is so benign.
Right.
She's just closing a door and repropping up some stuff that appears to have fallen. I mean, it is as benign as walking in, realizing that somebody knocked the pillows off the couch, and you just throw them back up onto the couch. I mean, it's not the same action, but it is that sort of mindless, and not realizing that when she does that, that is the thing that she's done that has essentially trapped him.
What's so exciting and thrilling from a filmmaking standpoint about that moment is, unless you absolutely know and have seen the movie, there is no tell there except a single point of view camera shot. Do you remember? Which isn't even meant to be
looking out the door.
Yes. Which you could challenge this, and I'd be okay with that. I don't personally think it's meant to be Simone's point of view as much as it's simply meant to click a tiny little subconscious thing in your brain as a viewer to think, oh, that's an odd shot. Oh, now we're moving on. You know what I mean? Like, there is no tell to how that happens and your sort of comprehension that it means anything at all.
Yes, no, I would agree with that. And yeah, it really is a very, like we've said multiple times now, a very effective film, a very effectively crafted film. And I think that one of the things that I just found so deeply affecting about that whole scene that we keep coming back to, of where she enters the land of the dead. I'm gonna start saying that instead of she enters the land of the dead, and when she enters that,
and they start singing Un Poco Loco together, and Dante's there.
That is a different movie. But they keep tagging back in on the lighthouse. Yeah. And when she looks out the window, and the lighthouse is actively working. It's not an illusion, a trick. The lighthouse is actively working, and there's just so much to that moment. The musical score, the framework, the sort of tenderness with which the whole thing plays out. And I'll bring in now, this doesn't mean we necessarily have to end, but I'll bring in the scripture that I was thinking of for this. Again, we're talking about, in so many different ways, this idea of lostness. And I would even go so far, before I bring in the scripture, talking about forgottenness, if you will. Like, just, that's something that I think she struggles with Carlos about, is that she feels, although he is basically saying, like, hey, it is time to move on. It is time to accept what has obviously happened to our son. And he doesn't know the truth of what's happened, but that our son is not coming back. And to her, that feels very much like a sort of a forgottenness. I don't think she actually uses that word, but it's very much like, I can't forget him. I can't just leave. I can't move on from this. And this passage really stood out to me, was even as I was actively watching the film, from Isaiah chapter 49, verses 14 through 15. It's an outcry from the people and then a response from the Lord. It says, "But Zion said, 'The Lord has forsaken me. The Lord has forgotten me.'" Verse 15 says, "Can a mother forget the baby at her breast and have no compassion on the child she has borne? Though she may forget, I will not forget you." And there is something to this film, and granted, you and I have the worldviews we have. We approach these things perhaps differently than the filmmakers necessarily intend. But there is something in this film that speaks to me about, hey, in the midst of your most desperate lostness, in the midst of your most desperate forgottenness, that all can still be made right. All can still be redeemed. And yes, I understand, listeners. I'm going to say this one more time, and then I'm going to stop qualifying it. I understand that we're talking about a moment in which she, sort of enters the land of the dead on her own action, her own activity.
Right.
I do not think this film is justifying her choice or her decision. I think there is a very intentionally redemptive sort of wholeness that is coming into her presence there with those children,
Right.
That she grew up with and that she was there in the orphanage with. And I think that is something that I would say to any and all of us, no matter your current state of mind, no matter your current conditioning of things, that all can be made right, that there is a very deliberate possibility that things can change, that things can be restored, that things can be made whole, that things can be reconciled. What I love so much about Isaiah's language is that he compares it to a mother. And in this film, you're dealing with all orphans. We don't know who any of these children's actual mothers are.
Right.
But in the end, ultimately, they are, in a sense, given a mother.
Right.
They are given one. And I don't know. I just found it incredibly poignant and moving, and did have this notion of like, hey, everybody else will forget about you and move on. They were left. I mean, this is going to sound so cavalier, but those children were left like in a little cabinet thing shoved into the wall. God. Like they were the definition of forgotten and discarded and dismissed. But they were not ultimately forgotten. Right. And I do, for all the complicated feelings that this film gives me, I find that so dang beautiful. Well, that those kids were not forgotten.
Well, and this is a random applaud to the movie. I even noticed tiny things in my rewatch last night. You just referenced the scene where she finds the bodies. You alluded earlier to the locket. That's the luck. It's a saint, I believe. When Carlos gives her that locket, that's his sort of charm.
Yes.
I don't know if you catch this. When she is pulling those bodies out and doesn't know what they are at first, the second she recoils and upon recognition, she grabs that locket. It's a wide shot, so you wouldn't necessarily notice it, but she puts her hand up and grabs that locket. It's really
I do
powerful.
Remember the moment you're talking about. Yeah.
And
yes.
This may seem like a random thing, and I think you would actually validate this, but I wanted to tweak a statement you made a minute ago in talking about all can be made right. My personal sort of thought is that all will be made right. And I had this sort of feeling. It's funny, before you even went to that scripture, that we should never be cavalier, and even my dismissal of the movie The Sea Inside, I hope, would validate this or substantiate my position on this. We should never be cavalier about the value of life and that there is always hope. Nonetheless, the King who is hope can redeem any action and will find you, and all will be made right. And I follow those implications as far as you want, and I might still go to the mat with you on there, or rather back you up on that and say yes. But I don't know. And it's interesting. I never would have, until this conversation, applied, and it would almost be too shallow to say Laura is a Christ figure, so I'm not going to do that. But it is fascinating the more I ponder the non-incidentalness that she is now a mother to an adopted child, that she herself was adopted, that her intention is to adopt further, that her passing saves and restores the lost and adopted ones. I don't know. It's a really beautiful read. You're a really beautiful read on the movie.
Not today, but
I don't know. I could just really get behind that. I want you to follow more heartfelt, lovely things if you want. I did feel like on a podcast about things faithful and fearful, we'd be a little remiss if we didn't hit on some scary moments. Can we do you,
You know
sincerely,
what?
do you
Why
have
don't we
any
do
more
this?
lovely paths to follow?
No. Why don't we completely, sort of upend all that we're used to? Why don't we wind down with some of our favorite scary moments, and then we'll introduce our David S.
Let's
Pumpkins.
do it.
Let's hit it.
Let's do it. This has been good. Dude, so you referenced this earlier. You learn through the backstory that reveals itself that there was one child of these passed away orphans who was severely disfigured, and as such wore this kind of really, really creepy sort of burlap sack thing on his head. Well, I can't remember if you see that image before this. Yeah, you do. You see some image of that before this actually transpires.
You see a drawing.
Yeah. So Simone has encountered these ghosts. We don't really know that for certain, but one of them is wearing this bag. Well, then Laura fights with Simone in the house during this big party, and 5 minutes later, she gets accosted by this child with this bag on its head. And as a viewer, you think, as you said earlier, you think it's that ghost. Well, then it is actually Simone. But nonetheless, when you don't know who that is terrifying.
Oh, it's
what
such
happens.
a freaky moment. Yes.
The visual and how it plays out, because it doesn't speak. Yeah. All it does is sort of attack her. And oh my gosh.
Yes.
What's one for you?
The biggest one for me, the biggest straightforward scare is when, darn it, I've forgotten the context for her presence in the film, but that old lady, when they see her, around the time that Simone disappears, and then they later see her like out on the street somewhere. And
before you do that, can I remind you what her context is?
Yeah.
She is. The reason
she's one of the workers at the orphanage, right?
Not just one of the workers. The reason she re-enters the story is because now that they have taken ownership of the house, she's coming to cover her tracks, because she was the mother of Tomas, the baghead kid, and who they pestered him until he accidentally died. She killed all the other children. So she's trying to come cover her tracks. So anyway, that's her entry into the story.
Now I remember that. So, but, when and this is before all of that is revealed, and she is crossing the street, but gets distracted and gets hit by a bus. That's not even the scary moment.
Right.
She gets hit by a bus, and then they're coming over near her and everything, and then all of a sudden, like, there's a cloth like draped over her body. She's dead. She's gone. Whatever. So like they drape this sheet over her, and she's dead. She's done. But then the like rigor mortis sets in for the corpse, and the hand like reaches up and grabs Laura's hand, and the sheet like yanks down, and so it appears like she's kind of reemerging or coming back to life or whatever, but her face is just smashed, and her jaw is like utterly destroyed, and it is this like just corpsey, ghastly, awful face.
What's so funny about that scene is, and I think I texted you when I was watching this, so I had, like I said, I tried to skim the movie in certain places, and one of them was there, and so I was fast forwarding it, and she gets hit by the car, and I knew that happened. Well, then I was like, crap, I'm gonna miss some exposition, so I stop right before the rigor mortis moment, and I back up a little bit just to see, okay, gosh, let me fill in some gaps here. Totally defenses down, because it's a dead body, right? I didn't even remember exactly what had happened. It's a dead body, defenses down. That rigor mortis moment happens, dude. I crapped my pants. I was so out of my seat.
Yes.
Oh my gosh,
it is
scary.
Oh my gosh, it's awful. Yes, it's awful. And I will say, did you have any more scary moments?
I do, but I'm worried it'll be what you're about to say.
No, I'm not. No, you do yours. You do yours. Do the rest of yours. And I'll end with
just
one.
The last one is knock on the wall, man. Knock on the wall. The wall.
Yes,
like
that is a freaky.
In context and out of context, that scene is so stinking freaky. Oh my gosh, it's so good.
Something that happened. Yes, during that scene, when I'm watching the movie, yes, I texted you this.
Yes.
So when I'm watching the movie, at the moment that I'm watching this movie, my wife and son are asleep in the other room. As I utterly foolishly decide to do most evenings, is I usually dim the lights, sometimes turn them completely off, and so all the lights were off, and I'm sitting here watching this movie, and then during that mother effing scene, suddenly from my hallway comes trotting my groggy and sleepy and wondering what in the world is going on. My son comes walking out of the hallway. Nathan, that is a fear I have not, like during that knock on the wall
That's
scene.
so funny.
When the scene when child ghosts are appearing out of nowhere, my son comes wandering out of down the hallway, and I do not know. I think I blacked out for a moment because I'm not quite sure exactly what.
He just heard
it was all fine.
He heard people were playing Knock on the Wall. He wanted to come play. That's awesome. I'm actually kind of thankful that happened to you because it's a great story. And now, anytime you ever are in a conversation about the orphanage and someone's seen it, you'd be like, "Oh, let me tell you."
Oh my gosh!
So, in the spirit of that, let's bring home the preface to #Del Toro 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 with bringing in Senor Pumpkins. So as we do every movie we talk about, we rate these films on a metric of our own insane design, that of numbers of David S. Pumpkins, 0 to 5, halvesies count. We scale it on the categories of style, scares, and substance. Reed, I'm gonna lead, and none of this will surprise you. So, style,
Nope.
like it's funny re-listening. I actually re-listened to our Shining episode, and I think on that pure metric, like Kubrick's Shining has such a specificity and peculiarity and intentionality from a filmmaking standpoint, which isn't to suggest Bayona's Orphanage does not. It's just not quite as like, I don't know, Kubrickian or whatever. But so I'm sort of distinguishing between the like and the filmmaking craft at work. Although I do think if the film craft is strong, this is a 5. I'm going to quit qualifying it. It's a 5. I love this movie. It's the 3rd time I've seen it. I was worried it might have diminished over time. I was just as sucked in and drawn in and bought in and scared, scared out of my wits this time. So go ahead.
No, totally understand. Well, and I've already talked about like the massive merits that I would put around the film, and I think I think it deserves all of them. I've also talked about my complicated feelings towards it, and so do not take this as a reflection of its quality. I'm going to give it a 4, only because of some of my complicated feelings around some of those emotional beats. But yes, so 4 for me.
All right, and what about scares for you?
Scares, good Lord. What's funny is that none of the scares are cheap, but they're also not like so plenteous for me. I think I'm going to land on a 4 for scares as well, because it's got a great atmosphere, but I think the film has more emotional sort of components to it than it does sort of fearful ones.
It's funny. I would pretty much agree with everything you just said, except that I would still land on a 5, because I mean, it's got jump scares, it's got emotionally earned, sort of tense scares. It's got the sheer, my wife, not unrightly so, being like, did you just say she accidentally killed him? Like, it's got that parental sort of, can there be articulated a more paralyzing sense of fear as a parent than that happening to you? No, I don't think there can be.
Right.
And it's got Knock on the Wall. This is a 5 in scares all the way down. Substance is last. Honestly, this is the one I was worried I might ultimately ding down a little bit, just because of my, like you, mixed feelings about the end.
Sure.
But whether she enters the land of the dead, whether she is a pseudo Christ figure, I have totally redeemed my mixed feelings, and I'm landing at a 5 on Substance, brother.
Right.
It is a 5.
You are giving it 5s down the line, 5s all the way down the line. Yeah, and you know what? Similarly, even though my affection for it, I feel like is kind of on par with yours, but sort of just the general ways that we approach these David S. Pumpkins, I'm going to give it 4s down the line for almost the same exact reasons. It's like I feel like there's a lot of merit to the film. I cannot recommend it, strongly enough. And so that means, listeners, that we actually give The Orphanage, even with my qualifiers, we give it 9 out of 10 David S. Pumpkins.
That's strong.
Just for some reference, Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, we gave 6.5 out of 10 David S. Pumpkins. We have given The Orphanage 9 out of 10. So do you know
off the top of your head what else might have gotten that high?
Oh, I do remember a film by M. Night Shyamalan called The Visit.
Well, you're going to forever reference that as a mild anomaly there. But are there any other like purely legitimate 9s we've given out that you can remember?
I think we might have given a 9 to Bone Tomahawk.
Okay.
I think we might have given. I would need to go back and look, but I think we also might have given a 9 to The Witch. But I can't quite remember.
I remember Alien was high, but I don't remember how high.
Well, Alien was a solid 10. Yeah.
Really?
So in terms of like 9s, Alien was a solid 10. And then what was our other solid 10? Was it Take Shelter? I think Take Shelter was a solid 10. Yeah. No, 7 was. 7 was a solid 10. So yeah, I mean we've definitely lauded some films that we really dearly loved, but yeah, that's a solid showing for The Orphanage.
1, 2, 3, knock on the wall, friend.
No kidding.
All right. Well, that's the beginning of this brand new series. We hope you enjoyed it. We hope you will join us next week as we dive deep on the devil's backbone. You ready? You ready, Reed?
I don't know, man, because the fear of God's the beginning of wisdom, but it's not the end of the conversation. I don't know if I want this conversation to continue. But sincerely, if you want to give us your thoughts on The Orphanage or anything that we've talked about here, stay tuned for our social media cues. And yeah, we'll see you next week for Devil's Backbone. Nathan, thanks so much for having this conversation, man. I appreciate it.
See you next week, guys.
Bye.
The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, but it is not the end of the conversation. To continue this conversation, you can follow us on Twitter at The Fear of God. Visit us on Facebook to comment on one of our posts or to post there yourself. You can follow Reed on Twitter at Reed Lackey. You can follow Nathan on Twitter at The Nathan Rouse. Visit morethanonelesson.com to leave a comment on this post or any of the official episode posts. Email us at fearofgodpodcast@gmail.com. That's all one word, fearofgodpodcast@gmail.com. And last but not least, if you listen to us through iTunes, we would greatly appreciate a rating or a review. Thank you for listening, everyone, and we'll see you next week.